Hello and welcome to our Now Add Salt podcast. This is a live broadcast on our Facebook page. This is where we answer the questions that CPAs, tax accountants, or the bookkeepers might have about sales tax. What's happening in the world, what's happening with Nexus, Wayfair, all those things. And today we've got Andy Johnson on with us. So welcome, Andy.
Hello, Ryan. Hello, everybody.
Thanks for being on with us. And I know that you've got some great information for us about, we've been talking about the Nexus review, how important that is for your current clients, and how their CPAs or tax accountants can help current clients by doing this Nexus review. But we want to kind of talk about how you can maybe gain new clients using this approach.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. We just did a in-depth session for our mentoring group that we took about 90 minutes and went in great detail. And obviously we don't have time to go through all of that today. But the fact is that when we see it in our own practice, where every day, probably, what would you say, 4 or 5 new prospective clients are reaching out to us. And these are really solid prospects. These aren't just, kicking tires, but really solid prospects right in our preferred type of client that's reaching out to us. Basically, fish jumping in our boat right now. And so the title of the mentoring group class was How to Find Clients Who Desperately Need Your Services. And we've been saying for a while that in the US, every business that has clients in the US really needs a Nexus review. And in the big picture, what we're trying to do is help clients avoid sales tax audits. And so we created a tool. It's a free tool that we'll make available in the show notes, but it's called the Sales Tax Audit Risk Diagnostic Test Tool. So we call it the STARDT Tool. I was just going to share it with you and just kind of go through the questions. And some of our CPAs, tax accountant partners are using this tool, not necessarily having their clients fill them out, although it's certainly possible to do that, but just using it as a kind of a checklist to go through. And it creates a customized report based on the answers that you give for your client, or your client gives on this form. It's an online form. And it's not super sexy from a user interface standpoint, but the content in there is really helpful. And the idea is, how do clients don't necessarily care about being compliant per se, but they certainly don't want to be audited. And the bigger states have 600, 800 auditors. And so it's very, very common to be notified that you're under audit, especially California, Washington, for your e-commerce clients. Very, very aggressive. Texas, very aggressive states on sales tax audits. So what if you had a tool to kind of get out ahead of that? And so that's why we call it the START tool, because you should really get started now. And it stands for Sales Tax Audit Risk Diagnostic Test. So if you're listening to this podcast, then there'll be a link that you can watch this video so you can see us go through it. It's just 15 questions. So it's sort of like Geico, in 15 seconds or less, you could assess what your audit risk might be. And so we go through various areas. So again, the right perspective for your clients is not overhyping, you got to be compliant. It's more, we want to help you take prudent steps to avoiding sales tax audits, devastating sales tax audits that could put you out of business. That's really the perspective that I like to take, because then it doesn't feel to your clients like you're just looking for more business. Because there's plenty of times where we tell businesses, you don't have to register everywhere you might have thought. It's not as bad as you thought. So it's not just about telling people to file income tax returns everywhere, sales tax returns everywhere. It's really about helping them avoid their biggest risks. So this questionnaire is designed to identify areas where you may be at risk. So we start with Nexus, and of course, Nexus is evolving now and with Wayfair, but some of the principle, the things that created Nexus certainly have always existed. It's just now it's easier to have Nexus. So it's still important to ask questions. It's not just where you now have economic presence going forward because of Wayfair, because what you're risking is missing somebody that's had Nexus because of other factors for many years. And then if you're just focused on the Wayfair thresholds, then you're going to make some bad recommendations that could get you and your clients in trouble. So you got to ask these questions. Do you have employees that live and work in other states? And sometimes really people are not sure about that. They just don't know. Sometimes they know for sure. No, we don't have any employees that live and work in other states. Do you own or lease property from others or to others? Sometimes people aren't thinking in terms of equipment that they lease to other parties, and then they forget they have property in other states. So we'll say no. So there's some hover text in here to help them, to remind them. Do your employees at least travel to other states? Yeah, they go to trade shows. So this pops up another detailed thing. So what are they doing when they travel? Do they make deliveries, replace inventory? Are they just making sales calls? If there's something else they're doing, like maintenance, then that's, they can put that information in there. It's a good prompt for discussion purposes. Again, you're not telling, when you're going through this, you're not telling them the answer. You're just gathering information. So sometimes I know that, you're going to be a little nervous that you're going to ask a question and they're going to assume that you're going to give them the answer. The answer is, let me look into this. Let me do some research and get back to you. Another question that we ask is, do you use independent sales reps or subcontractors in another state? And for some people, that's shocking that non-employees can give your client Nexus in another state. But it's certainly true. It's been true for many years. Even one independent sales rep, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, is enough. And this is a case way before Wayfair. Okay, so let's say yes, we do. So what do these people do? Are they making sales calls? Yes. Now, these next two questions and the last two questions we have under the Nexus analysis is, do your sales to customers in any other state exceed an annual threshold of 100,000 per state? That's just a way to kind of get into this economic presence issue. Not every state has that same threshold of sales. So it doesn't automatically mean you have Nexus everywhere just because your sales exceed 100,000 in any given 12-month period, but it's something that will prompt a discussion. So again, you could answer no to all these other questions that I've shared so far, and then still have Nexus because you exceed the threshold of sales. And then we ask the question about the transaction thresholds. And so our basic question is, do you exceed 200 sales transactions in any state during a 12-month period? And the answer is yes. So those are just right there. There's 6 questions. Now, we also have another free tool, which we'll talk about maybe next time, the Nexus determinator, we call it. And it has a lot more questions about Nexus. But those at least are the 6 most common ones.
Hey,
so
Andy,
now,
I just wanted
to
chime in here. I actually was speaking to other people in the firm, and they were giving me an example of just this, where we had a sign company come in as a new client, and they're performing an exposure review, kind of going through these same questions. And they reached out to me. It's like, hey, because of Wayfair, I think we've had a couple big sales in other states, and we're kind of worried about, now that we might meet the threshold. these other states, we might need to get registered. So they're going through these questions, and they have subcontractors that do the installations and the maintenance of their signs in these different states. And so they kind of had a heart attack thinking, oh, we may have had years of Nexus without even knowing it. And so, this is an important step to go through, because you don't want to just get registered with the state, because then a state could audit them and find out they've had years of exposure that they may have to pay out of pocket. So these are important questions to consider when onboarding a new client.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that I know one of the concerns is you as a tax advisor may be a little uncomfortable delving into an area that you don't feel total confidence in. So there's a lot of ways you could get around that. You could join our mentoring group, for example. But I know from experience that just asking these questions in a structured way like this, just following this script, will, first of all, you automatically, just by following the script, know more than 95% of other tax advisors in your competition, just by knowing to ask these questions. But second of all, your clients just feel a lot more comfortable, like, oh, okay, well, he knows or she knows what questions to ask. And so a lot of times the client needs to go and gather information based on these questions too. So it's not like you need to be able to wax really eloquent about Nexus right in this discussion. You're just gathering information.
Right.
And just by asking the information, you are and seem to be much more on top of things than the potential competitor. So, but Nexus isn't everything, right? The book says you start with Nexus, and you've got other considerations before you can pronounce whether your client is at risk for a sales tax audit or not. And the next area is sales tax rates. So there are thousands and thousands of taxing jurisdictions in the US, and potentially thousands of different tax rates that might apply to a given transaction. So this is what you don't want a situation where you miss the rate entirely by 2 or 3%, right? You're billing 5.5% and you should be billing 7.5%. That puts you in a real bad position because you get audited, and now you end up having to fork that money out of your own pocket. So you don't want that. So just thinking about how can we ask some questions about sales tax rates, because for some people, they don't even know. Sales tax rates isn't even an issue for them because they've just got one brick and mortar location, or they sell entirely through Amazon and Amazon collects the sales tax. So when we ask these questions, we have to think about these different potential situations so that it applies to everybody. So the way we ask the question is, which of these following items describes your situation when it comes to determining the correct sales tax rate to charge your customers? So just trying to be very clear, we're talking about your customers now, a client prospect. How do you figure out the best way to charge the right sales tax rate? So if they are selling in one, just through Amazon, for example, and sales tax rate really isn't their concern, then this question will seem really foreign to them, and they'll just say, oh, okay, yeah, no, this is not an issue. Or if they struggle with this because they sell to multiple locations and it's using their own shopping cart or their own invoicing system, and it doesn't have any kind of automated process, then this will immediately resonate with them, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, this is a major problem for us because determining the appropriate tax rate is currently a serious problem for us. And then, of course, we always give them the out, because the idea here is to raise the issue with the client, not trying to be extremely precise, because this is typically a free service that we're performing, this free consultation. We're just trying to uncover potential risks. So we don't want to put so much, force them to have to answer every question with specificity. If they want to just have an easy out and say, I don't know, I'm just not sure, then we give it to them. There'll still be an answer for them. just trying to just build a relationship too, right? So answer the questions, get some information, but also build a relationship of trust. So depending on what they say here, we ask question number 8, which is, so what system do you use for obtaining the correct rates? So if they're not even aware of a system, or like I said, it's a sales tax rate isn't an issue, then they'll just choose the first one. Then they might use an automated software system, one of the automated sales tax rate providers out there. Or sometimes it's very, very common that they are aware that they need the correct sales tax rates. Contractors do this a lot, and it's not like they have thousands of invoices every month, but they might invoice different places. So they just call the state, or they Google, what's the sales tax rate in, Podunk, Colorado, and they'll Google it, and they may or may not get it right, but at least that's the system that they use. If they have no idea, they're not even sure if it applies or not, they can just say not sure. And guess what? That's really all the questions that we ask about sales tax rates. There's kind of a meta reason that we ask these questions, and we're taking this opportunity to point out there's over 8,000 jurisdictions. Because if you sell to lots of locations, then sales tax rates should be a pain point for you. If it's not, then you're missing something. If you're just in one location selling, people come to your location, pick it all up, and you're using your local rate and it never changes, then it's not a big deal for you, and that's okay. So just in asking the question gets people thinking, I'm thinking this is not an issue, but maybe it should be. And in the report that they get, it will tell them more details. So you read the report and you can say, oh, okay, yeah, here's the deal. It'll just, first of all, make you very confident in your answers, but also your client will be feeling like they're talking to the right person. So Nexus is where we start. We consider the need to automate tax rates, or we try to assess, is there a chance that you're really getting the rate wrong? Because that could be a very, very painful sales tax audit issue. The next thing we want to talk about is what you sell even taxable? Is your product or your service that you sell taxable or that you buy? Because the rules are different from state to state. And sometimes for many businesses, that in and of itself is kind of like a revelation. It just depends on the rules, and depends where you're delivering it. If you're delivering a product across state lines, then it's the destination state rule that applies. If you're delivering a service, then the tax rules could depend on where the service is performed, or it could depend on where the service benefits, where the service is consumed. So it gets a little more complicated. Or if there's a combination of those two, it can get a little complicated. In most states, only certain services are subject to tax. In some states, like California, hardly any service is taxable. So that's where things really get complicated, is the taxability rules. And then because of letter rulings and court cases and administrative law cases, then the rules are constantly changing. So like I say, hence the complexity. So we want to know, first of all, what types of items do you sell? So do you sell tangible personal property? Yes. Do you sell services? Yeah, that's what we sell. Or do you sell both tangible personal property and services? So tangible personal property is things like, things that are tangible, but they're also personal, not real property. So that's what tangible personal property is. Or do you sell digital goods like ebooks or music or, game codes or coupon codes or what have you, or some mix of all of the above. So that's really important for determining how complicated is your sales tax situation. Is it complicated because you've got lots of rates that you're dealing with, or is it complicated because what you sell has lots of different taxability rules? So just trying to think, okay, what answer what question could we ask that will give us the best chance of analyzing whether they're at risk or not when it comes to taxability, is why we ask question number 10, which is, which of the following statements is most true regarding your confidence when it comes to knowing whether or not what you sell is taxable? Answer number 1, we're very confident in our understanding of the taxability of our products and services, so this isn't an issue for us at all right now, which is highly possible, because if all they're selling is widgets and there's no resale involved, then chances are that the widgets are going to be taxable everywhere they sell them. So they're just not worried about it. Now, it's rarely that simple, but that may be how they feel, and it may be largely true depending on what states we're talking about. Answer number 2 to that question is, thinking about the range of things we sell, we cannot say we're all that confident that we're taxing them correctly where we have Nexus. Either one of any of these 3 answers is fine. But I'm trying to give them an answer that applies universally and that allows us to continue a conversation with them, allows us to give them some valid and valuable information that they can actually use in the report. Or maybe they're not sure. When they say they're not sure, by the way, typically I will say, I understand that, because it can be difficult even just to figure out where your employees are. What do you sell? This is too new. The vocabulary is too new. So you're not sure. So I will still teach them about this concept in the report, just so that they come away actually having improved their knowledge. Now, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just thinking that, this could be really important to companies that sell very expensive products, to really get that tax rate right and the taxability of it correct as well. Just thinking about this sign company, their items are really expensive. They're custom-made signs typically, and depending on depending on the state and how the state taxes it, maybe it could be considered real property. And so, you don't want to get the rate wrong or the taxability of the item incorrect, because, your customer could potentially way overpay tax or underpay it. Mm-hmm. So, this is a pretty comprehensive study to make sure you're getting all the information you need to do the research.
Yep. The next area of potential big problems in a sales tax audit, some people will really resonate with this, and some people will say, what are you even talking about? So the way I've worded these questions is really careful, so that people don't conclude, oh, this isn't for me. This test is just not valid for me. That's the last thing you want. So regarding exemption certificates, we say this may be the easiest area for state auditors to find big exposure, because many companies don't realize that once they're registered to collect tax in the state, they are required to collect sales and use tax on each taxable sale, or they must have a certificate from the customer to document why no tax was collected. In most cases, it's a resale certificate you need if you're making wholesale sales. The next most common type of certificate is an exempt organization certificate. Again, some people will read this or glaze over it because the language doesn't make sense to them, and that's okay. The question is, do you need one for each customer in each state? And the answer is yes, generally speaking. So again, we have that introduction so that they have at least some context of the questions that we're asking. Question number 11, do you make any significant volume of exempt or non-taxed sales? So I try to say it various different ways so that the jargon doesn't, if they don't understand the jargon, then they at least can understand what are we asking. So a lot of people may not know what exempt sales are, but they know, like, okay, non-taxed. Still, for a pure non-tax person, sales tax person, this still may not be simple enough, and you might have to simplify it for them. We're just looking for, do you make a good volume of sales where your customer says, don't charge me tax, even though you have Nexus, because I'm exempt. I'm a hospital, I'm a school, I'm the government, or I buy this for resale. So one possible answer is we don't make any significant amount of non-taxed or exempt sales. So exemption certificate management is not an issue for us at all currently. Okay, good to know. And the people don't feel like, okay, yeah, this question applies to me because here's an answer that resonates with me. Answer number 2, we make at least some exempt sales that we consider significant, whatever that is, right? What's significant? I don't want them to ask me, so what's your definition of significant? I'm asking you, do you consider that you make any significant exempt sales? Or not sure? Again, the out is always there. Number 12 now. So now we're kind of branching down, kind of like an if-then approach, because if you do make significant non-taxed sales or exempt sales, I want to know more. So which of these is most true about your collecting the required exempt certificates? First of all, first answer is this just doesn't apply. Because I might have said we don't make any amount of non-tax sales. So when I get to this, it's a required answer. So I can easily click on this question does not apply to us. By the way, even if they say this in the report, I'm still going to I'm going to acknowledge their answer that they don't make exempt sales, but I will say something like, but if you do in the future, here's what you need to know, okay? Answer number 2, for most or all non-tax sales transactions, we collect the exemption certificates before or at least soon after the time of the sale. My guess is that most of your clients will not choose this answer because this is exceedingly rare, where people are really on top of exempt certificate collection. And then 3, of course, I don't want to also, be the accuser, like put myself in the shoes of like an auditor and kind of make them feel bad that they're not doing this. So the answers are worded carefully that way. So on number 12, I said we either don't collect certificates at all or it only happens some of the time. I just want to start the discussion or not sure. I have another statement or question. I want to know if they do collect certificates. So if this is like a total foreign language to them, then they can just answer this does not apply to us or not sure. But if they understand what exempt certificates are and they do make exempt sales and they do collect certificates, I want to know some more about your situation. So which of these describes your current process for maintaining copies of these certificates? So one thing, by asking that question, people are like, oh, we're supposed to keep copies of those? So again, they could say it doesn't apply, or the answer is we store the exempt certificates electronically or in a central filing system, making them easily retrievable, and keeping them updated is relatively easy. I expect that nobody will take that answer, but in just reading it, they'll be, wow, that's even possible that they could be easily retrievable and keeping them updated is relatively easy. I need to know more about this because they wouldn't be asking it if it wasn't possible, but I'm certainly not going to choose that answer because no way. Or we store the certificates we collect at various locations, probably not easily retrievable nor easily updated. So again, I throw that word probably in there so it gives them an option to not look so bad. Like, wow, you're really nailing me on these questions. I say it's probably, could be, possibly, because that's a better conversation starter than, do you realize you could be going to jail? Or not sure. All right, so that section is for exempt certificates. Oh, I guess I better answer these. I can't move on. I'll just choose not sure, just to have something to answer. All right, now we can move on. Now, one last final area that doesn't apply to many smaller businesses. So I've been very careful how we ask this question regarding use tax, because again, you don't want to be the bad news bearer. If people never have considered that they might owe use tax, we need to put this over kind of softly. So regarding use tax, I will say, when the state auditor shows up, she will always look at your purchases to determine if use tax has been paid. either to the vendor or you self-assessed it. Sometimes businesses are caught off guard by this since states almost never audit individuals. So again, I'm trying to convey, hey, we hear you. We're not trying to condemn you. We don't want to come across as, chastising you for missing this important area. So I got one question regarding use tax in this whole survey, and that is, which of these describes your current process for accruing and remitting use tax on your purchases? Here's my easy out for them. Of course, I got the not sure, but I also have this one. We pay tax to our vendors on the invoice. We don't self-assess use tax. Because if you do, if all your vendors charge you use tax, you're in good shape. Now, the chances that all vendors do that, probably slim, but at least it's an answer you can give. Answer number 2 is we have a manual system, either manual or automated. We have a system anyway for accruing and paying use tax when the vendor doesn't charge us on our purchases. So that will be a rare answer, but it also makes people think, so companies have this? I need to learn more about this, or we're not sure. So now we'll get to the very last question, which is, hey, you recognize this is just an assessment tool. It's not the full service. It's a way to triage prospect clients to see who needs the most of our help right now. So I want to take you off the hook, and I want to take us off the hook in asking these questions. They could choose any one of these. And the question is, you realize these questions cannot cover every possible sales and use tax audit risk? You realize that, right? And if you didn't, now you do, because you're going to read these answers. Yes, this is just an overview, and every company has unique facts. Okay, good. You can take that answer. That's great. Or yes, we understand this is not a specific consultation based on our unique facts and circumstances. Or yes, we get it. And most of the time people say, yes, we get it, but they've read those other two. And then if they'll provide their email address and name, they will get the report delivered to them when it's ready. And so there's a big incentive to get the right email in here. And then, of course, it becomes part of our list or your list of prospects that you can send even more valuable information to them in the future. So when they submit it, it creates the report based on their answers, and it shows up pretty much within a few minutes inside of their email box, and it will prompt for those that have had Nexus for some period of time. We know from experience it'll prompt further questions. The report will help you, because you'll get a copy of the report too. It will go to your clients and to you, and so you'll know kind of what we're saying and how to say it. And if somebody has had some exposure for a long period of time, like the sign company that Ryan's talking about, then their situation could be complicated. They might have to do some voluntary disclosures, or at least consider it, to avoid some real potential exposure. So if it's a pure Wayfair economic presence going forward, then we have considered basically the most important issues, and you can feel pretty confident in talking to them. So feel free to use the START tool. The link to it will be in the show notes, and do so. We would be happy to answer your questions about that, to work with you and your client together. Sometimes CPAs want to work with us and want to be involved, and that's awesome. Other times they're like, guys, can you just take this client and we'll just refer their business to you? That works out perfect too, because we don't do all of the different services that you perform. We just do state and local taxes. So that's what I think. Every business in the US needs a Nexus analysis, and the START tool is a way of not only analyzing Nexus, but the other 4 hotspots that could get them in trouble as well.
All right. Thanks, Andy. I just want to point out that, I believe you put this START tool together, yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is a culmination of over 25 years of experience. And so when you put this together, you really kind of, made it easy, to gather information, also for companies to really get a grasp of what their Nexus exposure could possibly be. And so, yeah, again, in the show notes, you can find a link to this tool. And also, there'll be a link to the video if you didn't get to see it live. And so you can hear and see Andy's explanations of each question as we go through, and make it a little bit easier for you to fill out with your clients. All right, thanks again, Andy, and hope to see you next week.
All right.